Man, it's the last Sunday of 2015. Is that crazy to anybody else? That is amazing, isn't it? I mean, it's 95 degrees outside, which is even more amazing. I cannot believe that. Did y'all have a good Christmas? We had an awesome Christmas Eve service here Thursday, and if you were here, you know it. It was incredible, and the music was awesome, the worship was awesome, communion was awesome, and then we get to wake up Christmas morning, and I've got two kids. I've got two small kids. I've got a 5-year-old, and I've got a 1.5-year-old, and my wife, y'all, is a saint. My wife is Rachel, and she sings up here on Sunday mornings, but she's just a saint because she knows how to really build up the excitement for Christmas morning. You know what I mean? For a 5-year-old. And so she bakes the cookies and she puts them out for Santa Claus, and she's got all the, all the presents ready for as soon as he first wakes up. You know, my oldest son Avery, he'll be ready to open the presents. And so kind of the highlight of my Christmas is Avery wakes up and he runs in to open up his presents, and the first present he opens up, he goes, "Oh my gosh!" He's just filled with excitement. He goes, "This is the greatest present I always wanted." And I said, "That's awesome, man. What is it?" He goes, "I don't know, but it's a present." He got a present, and that's all he needed. That's all he needed in that moment. He got himself a present, and I just thought that was the greatest thing in the world. And kids are funny, man, because I think Avery's probably got boxes from last Christmas that I think he said the exact same thing about that are still in his room. He might have played with it once or twice, but that was the greatest thing for him in that matter, right? He got a new toy to play with. And I just think that's an interesting thing. I started thinking about that. That's an interesting feeling to discover that you don't really need what used to be the most important stuff to you. And, but as a kid, you just don't know any better. When you're a kid, you just want to get as much as you can, as fast as you can while you can get it, right? When Rachel and I got married, when we first got married, I was pastoring a church up in Virginia. And so we were here and we were packing up boxes to move. We were, we're moving to Virginia, and we were, we both had boxes of stuff that we had that, we were just kind of going through and figuring out what we needed to take. And, I had boxes of maybe some old clothes. She had a bunch of boxes of clothes, and, we were just trying to figure out what do we need to take. And I remember this. This was the weirdest thing to me, and ladies, help me out with this. She had a boyfriend box of old letters, from old boyfriends. Was that weird? Did y'all? Totally weird. I thought the same thing. So we burned that box, and we didn't take that box. We did not take that box with us. All right? We just had all these boxes, man. We had to, but you know what I mean? You just get all these boxes of stuff that you don't think, you really don't even need, right? But we just hold on to it like we're going to miss out on something, right? And you would think as we grow older, maybe we would grow out of that. And I think this is a pretty smart bunch, right? I think that's a good thing that you and we know better, right? That life's not just about storing up stuff that ends up in an attic or a dusty old box, right? It's a good thing that this group, we've all learned better, right? Right? Y'all remember there's an advertisement, 2-3 years ago, and it had a bunch of people carrying around a number. And it was for a retirement company. Y'all remember that commercial? And it was, everybody had a number. What is your number? And the whole goal of the campaign was to simplify the process of retirement planning. And it encouraged people to identify, what is the number? You need to calculate the total amount of money that you need to have saved up by the time you retire. And this number is unique to each individual or each couple, and it depends upon whatever your goals are, right? Y'all remember this commercial, right? And if you look at how most people live, generally the answer is simply more. Right? Doesn't matter how much we have, we think we need more, which means that whatever our investment strategy is, it will always be to get as much as we can, as fast as we can, while we can still get it, right? So maybe we haven't learned a better investment strategy after all, and I think maybe we can consider a new one as we go into 2016, because Jesus talked a lot about our investments, that in God's eyes, investments were a really, really big deal. What do we invest in our lives in? Jesus said this is from the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 6. and this is where we'll be today. Matthew chapter 6, verse 19. Jesus says this, he says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moth and rust do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." And then he says this in verse 24, he says, "No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and you will despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." And that's convicting stuff. And so that's I just kind of want to live there today. And I think we'll hopefully learn some cool things. But the first kind of big thing I want to take away from this is that Jesus really calls us to invest in something, and I think that's a good thing. Jesus never says stop desiring. Jesus never says stop seeking, stop planning. He doesn't say any of that. And I think it's a fairly common misconception outside the church and really inside the church that following Jesus leads you to a less exciting life, a life without adventure, a life without excitement. And I know personally so many people who are interested about following Jesus, but they resist taking a step of faith because they think Jesus is going to make their life boring, right? And I think when I read a passage like this in Matthew 6, I feel like the exact opposite actually is happening. That Jesus is not calling us to settle for less. Rather, he's saying, look, you need to seek more. Store up for yourselves treasures that actually matter. That means that you will be thoughtful in 2016, and that you will be ambitious in 2016, and that you will be wise about the kind of life that Jesus has prepared for you and for me. And it's interesting, Jesus talks about two kind of investments that we make every day, whether we know it or not. We are making these kind of investments every day. When we are making investments, what Jesus calls treasures on earth, or we are investing in treasures in heaven. And treasures on, they say that's great. What does that mean? Well, treasures on earth are investments that are temporary, things that are impermanent, all right? Things that are going to be vulnerable to decay or theft or destruction, right? And when we grow up, we learn that these things include like a Ninja Turtle box or toy that you get when you're 5 years old, or a boyfriend box when you get older, right? Right. But even more sophisticated stuff, right? Like, your bank account, right? And bank accounts are awesome, and we need to provide, and we need to make money, and all that's good. But if that's where we put our trust, maybe that's not such a good thing, right? Worldly achievements are awesome. Social status, all those things are good, but those would be treasures on earth. There's a fascinating story. I read this week. A few years ago, one of the wealthiest philanthropists in the Jewish world passed away, and he left behind $1 billion. Just think about that. Left behind $1 billion, and he left behind 2 wills when he died, and he gave it to his children. And the first will was to be opened immediately after he passed away, and then the second will was to be opened 30 days. After a 30-day mourning period, they were supposed to open the second will, right? And so he passes, and their children open the first will, and among the instructions in the first will was the request that this man be buried in a certain pair of socks. And that was it. That was just the request that he had given to his children. And it sounded like a strange request, but they made it anyway. But there's Jewish burial customs, right? And so the family actually went before a rabbi in a Jewish court to appeal this decision, but the decision had been made. This man could not be buried in a pair of socks. And so 30 days later, they opened the second will, and the will said this: "My children, you must have buried me now without my socks. I want you to understand that a man can have $1 billion, but he can't even be buried in a pair of socks." I said, whoa, man, that's convicting to me, right? That's convicting to me. Now, my first reaction when I thought about that was, dude, if I was your kid, I really don't care about your socks. I was more concerned about like your $1 billion that I might get a piece of, but that's just selfish, and I'm a sinner, and whatever. I'm a sinner, right? But the point is, right, at the end of your life, you can have $1 billion, whatever, you can be worth more than the world, and it's not even worth a pair of socks. And it doesn't matter how much stuff you accumulate, it doesn't matter how much kind of wealth or fame or accolades that you achieve, you can't take them with you. Right? And when we place our trust in treasures that do not last, we end up, and we do this, I do this all the time, we end up measuring our success or our worth relative to those who have more, right? How much does my neighbor have? What kind of vacations do they go on? How come they get to go to Florida twice a year and we get to go like once every 3 years? Or what kind of car does that person have? Young people, and I see this so much, especially people who are just getting out of college. I think this is crazy. They get out of college and they think they're supposed to be making the same amount of money that their parents who have worked for 25 and 30 years are supposed to have. They're supposed to have the house that their parents have had. And you're 22 years old, and that is just crazy. And we drive ourselves mad over this. Well, what does that say about me, right? If my kids don't have as much stuff as my neighbor's kids have, right? And parents, you just feel pressure of providing more and more. And you can't even afford it, but you just want to provide more and more for your kids, right? And kids, you feel the pressure of having to keep up with your friends at school, right? Am I getting into your living room yet? Because I've believed this. Right, and we live these anxious lives based on wanting, right, or a sense of needing more and more, not because we think that these things are going to last or that they provide some kind of peace or security, but because our lives start to boil down to what number we carry around. What is our number? And I think there's another place where people know you by your number, and that's called prison, and that's what we do. We imprison ourselves with how much we have, right? Storing up treasures that end up in attics and security deposit boxes. Right? And if we're still not sure what Jesus is getting at, I mean, he puts it about as clear as you can. He says, look, the bottom line is you cannot serve both God and money. You can't do it. He doesn't say money is evil. He doesn't say that we can't learn to use it well or obviously provide for our families. He simply says you can't place your trust, you can't place your security, you cannot place your future in both. You can only serve one. And what this does is it speaks directly into our assumption that our best chance at a good life, our best chance at a good life is to get as much as we can and to get it as fast as we can while we still can. But y'all, that assumption is a lie. And it's a lie that you're only as good as your number and that your number should always be more. And I think what a tragedy it is that we've come to define the worth of a human life based on a bank account. But there's good news, y'all, in Jesus. There's good news in Jesus because he knows that we are worth far more than this. And he talks about another kind of investment, and that's what we'll talk about today. He talks about treasures in heaven where moth and rust do not destroy. And they're not just gold crowns that you're going to get some glad morning when this life is over. I'll fly away. He's not talking about that. He's talking about real life things right now that we can invest in every day to live a life that really counts. And that's what my prayer is for 2016. If you got something to write down, let's do this. That's my challenge this year. Make some new priorities, make some new commitments. And you say, what does it mean to store up treasures in heaven? What does that look like? What does that mean? And the first things first. And I think it's this. It's investing my life with God every day. Investing in my life with God. Because listen, you are not the only one seeking treasures that matter, right? God has treasures that he is seeking as well. And I believe this, and it may sound corny, and I don't even care, but I think God's greatest treasure is you. Say this with me. Say this. I am God's greatest treasure. That's good, right? That God gave everything, that God paid the ultimate sacrifice through the life and death of his son so that we could have life, we could have it abundantly, and yet the truth is it is so easy with all the other pressures, with all the other anxieties, with all the other stress, with work and kids and all that stuff to put our relationship with God as the very last priority, right? We get busy, we get tired, we get hurried with all this stuff, we put that at the back burner. But y'all, there is something about taking time every day to spend time with God who will remind you just how valuable you are. I put on my cell phone every Tuesday morning, I get a notification to take the trash down. Because if my phone doesn't tell me, then Rachel will tell me, and I'd rather have the phone tell me because I don't want to hear it. You know what I mean? You know why I do that? Because I forget. I forget to take the trash down. And then I come home and there it is, just staring me in the face, full of trash. And I forget to take it down. I forget stuff. And I bet if you're like me, you forget stuff, right? But just imagine this. Imagine that you had a daily reminder that your worth is without measure. Imagine that. Imagine that your value to God, that you learn every day, you read every day, that your value to God is safe and your eternal future is secure. It doesn't matter who thinks or says what about you. It doesn't matter what your past failures are, that you matter to Him. You say, how do you spend time with God? What does that look like? You know what? It can be a million different things. Yeah, one of the things that I do, I learned this from my dad. First thing I do when I wake up is I lean over. While I'm still in the bed, I lean over, poke my head up on my hand, and I just think about the day for just a minute, just 5 minutes. Just think about the day. And I say, God, be with me today. Be with my kids today. Be with my wife today. Be with my friends and my family, my church. Just guide me today. That's a good start, right? It's funny, I had an appointment one day. It was on the north side of town. I left early, and I was going up 400, and the intersection of 400 and 285, it's like a death pit where cars just never return, right, at 7:30 in the morning. It's just the worst, right? So traffic is dead stop, and I'm driving. I'm not even alive. I haven't even had a cup of coffee. I'm just like, oh my gosh, let's just go. And I look over to the right, and I see this lady, and she's kind of a bigger lady, but dude, she is jamming, and she is praising the Lord. And I can tell she's praising the Lord because she's got like a biscuit in one hand, she's got her hand on the wheel, and she's got her eyes closed, and she is just praising the Lord. And all I could think about was, lady, I really wish you'd open your eyes at this point and look at the road in front of you. But she taught me something. Because how many of you drive in Atlanta traffic? And you just kind of sit there, right, for a long time. Some of you drive in it for an hour a day. Some of you drive in it for like 2 hours a day or 3, right? And she taught me something that day, that she was going to use her time, that was going to be her time that she was going to spend with God. And she was listening to music. I don't know what she was listening to. Probably wasn't Bill Gaither, but it was something. She was praising the Lord, boy, I tell you that. And that was her time. And you know what, I do that sometimes, and maybe you can. We post all of our sermons here on YouTube, and so when I'm in the car, and if I know I'm driving a long time, I'll pull up one of Dad's sermons or one of Jeff's talks or whatever. And I make that a priority. I try to fill myself some way. There's different podcasts that you can listen to, music you can listen to, all different kinds of things. That's a way you could spend time with God. Some of you, it's just being silent. You just need to get away. That's your time with God. And for all of us, I encourage us, we need to just open up God's Word. Open up the Bible. Start reading. That's the way we can spend time with God. Because if we don't take time each day to spend time with God, guess what? We will lose sight of our value and our worth to God, and we will begin looking for value and treasures that will not last. That's what will happen. And so I encourage you, 2016, let's make this a priority. Let's invest our life with God. That is a treasure that will last. Second thing is this, write this down. Storing up treasures in heaven means prioritizing my relationships. All right, prioritizing my relationships. I know of a guy, he counsels married couples with kids. And time after time, these couples will come in to him and they'll say, we're dying here, right? We are dying here. Is there something that we need to read for our kids? Or is there like a pill that we need to take? Or is there like a pill that our kids can take? Or is there something, right? And his first response always to the couple is, have you made sure that you have one night a week for a date? Have you made sure that you've got one night a week for a date, right? Have you made sure that you create time together each night after the kids are in bed? He says this, you do that for 2 months, do it for 2 months, come back, and then we'll talk about the rest. We'll figure the rest out. And guess what? Most of them don't come back, right? Most of them don't come back. And I think what's happening is that these couples are experiencing the fruit of prioritizing their relationship, which is worth more than a job title. It's worth more than a higher tax bracket. Yes, we have to be good stewards to provide for our loved ones, but not if that means you only make times for the people that are most important to you. Maybe you make time for them like once a month. That's not good enough. Prioritize relationships. And Jimmy teaches this all the time. He talks about when we prioritize our relationship with God, the rest takes care of itself. With our relationships with other people, right? I love that. When we invest our lives with God, the ones that matter most to us will begin to grow like you wouldn't believe. C.S. Lewis says it like this, saying the same thing. He says this, when we put first things, let me try that again. When first things are put first, second things are not suppressed, but they're increased. I love that. I love that. Treasures that last means that we prioritize real life people that we see every day, and we make it known that they matter to us. Let's do that this year, can we? Third thing is this. Write this down quickly. Storing up treasures in heaven mean that we serve where there is a need. That's what that means. When Jesus says, storing up for yourselves treasures in heaven, he's not talking about another place somewhere else that we're going to go one day. He's talking about right now, every day. When you wake up tomorrow, this is what he's talking about. Serving where there is need. Listen, ministry is not done by paid professionals in a church, right? That's not where ministry is done. Ministry is the work of God's people where there is a real need. And growing up, you might have thought, if you're called by God, that means that you're going to be a missionary somewhere, or you're going to be a pastor, or you're going to be a nun, or you're going to be a full-time church worker, right? This is what the Bible says. The Bible says it like this, 2 Timothy. He says, he saved us and he called us to be his own people, not because of what we have done, but because of his own purpose. You know what that means? That means that we were created to serve. That means that we were created to be a part of ministries that are happening right now at this church. I've been bragging on him for 2 weeks, but Dusty's one of my favorite people in the world. And you know why? Because Dusty found a need for homeless people, and he put in his blood and his sweat and his tears and his money, and he went to those people when nobody else was coming, and he asked those people, what do you need? And he met their need, and he did it himself. And I think we've got people like that in our church right now who are meeting people's needs. And I think that's what it's about. That's what the church is about. We've got ministries all over this place. We've got Lost and Found ministry, which we give to. We've got our own children's ministry, which I think is so important, and there's so much of a need there. And maybe that's something that you can invest your life into. Whatever, there are countless stories of people in this place who have said, you know what, enough with my number. Let's go out and let's do something that matters for someone in need. Find something this year and invest your life into it. Give where there's a need. Last thing is this. Storing up treasures in heaven, I think, means that we give regularly as a discipline of trust. That we give regularly as a discipline of trust. And rarely would any of us gauge our spiritual health based on our tithe, right? Because I like to think my faith in God is strong because it feels strong. Right? That's why. Right? But what I've discovered in my life is that I don't really trust God if I can't trust him with my checkbook. Right? My mom's here, and my mom is a wonderful example of that. A lady who's understood the power of tithing. Never had a substantial amount of money. It's never been where we came from. But for her, it was a decision that was made up in her mind. And at some point, she would say, you just got to act on the statement, I trust God. Do you say that? I trust God. Do you believe that? You got to act on that. She would say, you know what? One of my favorite names for God in the Bible that you find in the Old Testament is Jehovah Jireh. That means God provides. God provides. And he has provided for her every need. And she taught me that at a young age. And this doesn't mean that you can't follow Jesus and save money. And I think about the Good Samaritan. You know, the story that Jesus tells about the Good Samaritan. And, you know, the Good Samaritan had money that he had saved to pay for the innkeeper for the man who was beaten along the way. He had saved money, and he was able to use it. I think that's good. But you got to be willing to give as a discipline of trust. And I think that's a huge risk in a world like ours, because it means that we have to take God seriously when he says, seek first my kingdom and all that you need will be added as you need it. It means we will have to stare in the face of all the what ifs, right, that we'd rather buy and save our way out of, and say instead, listen, my life is worth more than a number, because you and I were made for more than that. You were made to build a life of real, lasting treasures. Treasures not subject to decay. Treasures not subject to theft or destruction. Treasures that are far greater than fame or fortune. And it's an interesting feeling to discover that you don't really need what used to be really important stuff. And yes, it can be really scary for you, because it's really scary for me. Right? Yes, it can be unsettling, but it can also be the road to a newfound freedom that you have never known in your life. And just wouldn't it be something? Think about this. Wouldn't it be something if as a church we were committed each and every day, not just to get as much as we can and get it as fast as we can, and while we still can get it, listen, there's enough of that in this world already, but that we were committed to invest in each other, to invest in our relationships with God, to find needs in our community and meet those needs, right? What if we were that kind of church? Can you imagine? Man, we'd change the world. We could change the world. Or as one writer puts it, and I love this. I don't even know who wrote this, but I read it. I think it's so great. Listen to this, and may this be said about us at the end of 2016, to come to the end of the year with the satisfaction of having stood for what is good, with the joy of having been loved and having loved well in return, with the memory of having shown mercy and the peace of having walked with God. These are the true treasures, the treasures of the kingdom, a fortune no thief can plunder. Would you bow your heads? Would you pray with me? God, as we conclude another year, 2015, God, there's so many wonderful things that happen. I just think about the different people in this room, and I know there was some really high highs in this room, and I also know there were some really low lows in this room, and there's victories won in this room, and there were tragedies that happened in this room. But God, our prayer is that as the more that we seek you, the more that we may understand that we really can live a life that counts and a life that makes a difference. Makes a difference not only in this church, but it begins to make a difference in our families and in our workplace. That we were created for so much more. That we've been given the keys to the kingdom. That God, we can be your light shining in this world where there's so much darkness. God, we can show light to people. God, that's what our prayer is for this place, for this church. God, you've been so good to us. And we're thankful for that. We're thankful for your son, Jesus. We're thankful that he didn't just come as a little baby, but that he would grow up and that he would teach us how to be human. That he would show us how to be fully alive. And that he would die for us. And that he would overcome death. And give us a new chance at life. God, we love you. 2016 is going to be an amazing year. And we're so glad we're on this journey with you. We pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Bless you.
Wow.